So I'm going to start with an acknowledgement. We acknowledge Aboriginal people as the traditional owners and custodians of the land we live and work on, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So welcome to the second in our AusNet Tomorrow Customer Insights series. We're really excited about this one. This is sharing the results of our recent Quantifying Customer Values study. Now, this research is possibly the most robust quant study that's been done on customer willingness to pay for network services across the NEM, and it certainly is for our network customers. It's clearly more important than ever to understand the value that customers place on core and new network services as we move through the energy transition. Now, there'll be some time for Q&A at the end. So we've set up a Slido and we've got the code at the bottom of each of our slides. So please feel free to jump on and pop your questions into Slido. Now, in today's session, the plan is that we'll share an overview of the project and our results that are focused on the value of customer reliability and resilience, for which we've built on the AAR's methodology for setting the VCR. Then we'll share our broader quantified customer values, as well as some possible next steps and how we intend to take this research forward, which, as a spoiler, will involve a lot of further engagement as part of our reset process. And it's great to see so many of our reset customer panel members on the call today. So just to start with the key findings of what this research is telling us about our customers. Firstly, they value reliability higher than the AAR's current VCR, which suggests to us that the AAR's VCR is likely to increase in this year's review. They're also open to cost sharing. So we asked some questions that tested across subsidies. And even where our customers don't directly benefit, generally they're quite social minded and are comfortable sharing costs for some values. And we'll obviously get into the detail later. Thirdly, they see value in investment while they're still understandably concerned about affordability. And we did test income pressures as part of this survey. And actually that finding was a lot stronger than we had anticipated it would be. They highly value convenience, which is something that we've seen through various different pieces of research, and including putting a positive value on being able to charge their EVs flexibly. They highly value not wasting solar. Now, the sentiment towards solar is extremely strong. And again, this came through in this study. And that's a value above economic levels. And finally, they value resilience above all. So for all the values tested, it was most important to customers that we avoid those long duration network outages. And that was a very consistent finding across all demographics. So just to start with a brief overview of the project. So what this project does is allows us to attach hard numbers to things that customers value that we otherwise can't quantify, so we can build more holistic customer-centric business plans. It also is a source of robust data that we can trust from a statistically significant perspective. And it shows customers' priorities across investment drivers, as well as looking at individual investment drivers. It captures the value of both service improvements, but also degradations in the willingness of customers to accept lower service levels for lower costs. And it complements our qualitative engagement. So we did a bit of qualitative engagement as part of this study, but we've also done a whole heap of other qualitative engagement that allows us to really be confident about these findings. However, with all research studies, there are limitations, so I'll set some of these out now. Firstly, customers' reasoning isn't captured en masse. We did do some qualitative testing of these results, but not to the sample size that we did the quantitative. It's limited to customers' perceived value. So there'll be things that customers don't quantify, can't quantify, and might not think of when completing the survey. And it clearly doesn't tell us how to apply the values in business planning. And that's something that we'll be working through, as I mentioned earlier, with our engagement panels. So I'm going to hand to Jade to give an overview in more detail of the project. Thanks, Jade. Jade, you're on mute, sorry.
Apologies. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jade Park. I'm a research specialist at AusNet. Thanks for the opportunity for me having a presentation today. I will just go through the research methodology relatively quickly so we can dive into the findings very soon. Our study consisted of 3 key phases: research design, qualitative, and quantitative phases. In the research design phase, we collaborated with our AusNet EDPR engagement panels and internal teams to finalize benefits and methodology. The qualitative phase with 12 in-depth interviews was vital in refining language and testing comprehension of the concepts and benefits. But we didn't stop there. We also conducted 5 customer workshops, engaging around 120 customers in total. This allowed us to further test the concepts using a different methodology, as well as gain deeper insight into customers' reasoning. That's something the quantitative approach may not have uncovered, as Charlotte briefly mentioned earlier. Finally, the quantitative phase included data collection through an online survey with cognitive interviews. This ensured we collected accurate and reliable data from customers. Throughout this entire process, our EDPR panel members played an integral role. They actively participated in every important step, helping to ensure the robustness of our approach and instilling confidence in both customers and stakeholders regarding the research findings. Next slide, please. Thank you. Tapping into a bit more detail, in the research design stage, we not only engage with our customer advocates involved in the EDPR 2026-31 process, but we also sought feedback from government bodies and regulators on our approach. Following all this engagement and collaboration, we conducted 12 online 45-minute in-depth interviews in September and October last year, 8 with residential and 4 with small business customers. The insights from these in-depth interviews were critically important in shaping the design of the quantitative survey. We aim to get reliable and meaningful results from our customers. And to achieve this, we implemented clear and simple language throughout the entire questionnaire, particularly for the more complex concepts. We also provided definitions for the key terms to ensure respondents had a full understanding of the context. Additionally, we explained the funding structure in detail, including how distribution charges appear on bills and how they are calculated. This was crucial in helping customers provide accurate responses to the willingness to pay questions. Maintaining consistency in how we presented the feature-based case was also a priority so that all customers could clearly understand the scenario. Lastly, we articulated the distinctions among the different benefit scenarios very clearly and focused on explaining how these differences would impact the customer experience. Next slide, please. Thank you. For the quantitative phase, we conducted an online survey from November 2023 to January 2024 just before the February 2024 storm event. We had a total of 3,527 completions from both residential and business customers. The survey had two key parts. Part one focused on VCR, the value of customer reliability and resilience. I don't want to get too technical, but in simple terms, contingent valuation helped us find the base price that customers are willing to pay for the base scenarios. We then fed this into the chosen modeling to build up the scenarios and their cost variations. Part two is for the broader benefits. We introduced 5 key areas: flexible EV charging, enabling solar export, improving reliability for well-served customers, reliability and resilience. We asked customers about their willingness to pay for the service enhancements and willingness to accept for the service degradation in each area, except for the improving reliability for well-served customers, for willingness to accept questions. Finally, we also asked about willingness to pay for the entire bundle of services. This helped understand customers' preferences and priorities for the different expenditure streams. Thanks for being with me so far. This covered the key details of our research methodology and approach. Now I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Chloe, who will dive deeper into the outcomes and insights from VCR exercise. Over to you, Chloe.
Thanks, Jade. Oh, sorry. I'm off mute now. Sorry about that, guys. I'll just fix my slides. Sorry, guys. So the first part of the study involved us coming up with a value for customer reliability and then also a value for customer resilience. To do this, we lent very heavily on the VCR methodology, last implemented by the AAR in 2019. This section of the study had some 3 key findings that we'll talk through. So first of all, the value for reliability for AusNet's residential customers was a lot higher than what the VCR currently values it at. We think firstly this comes down to customers' willingness to pay, and then combined with the unserved energy that we assume is lost during the outage, as well as the probability of each outage type occurring. But I'll bore you with that in a minute. And then also we adapted the methodology to look at the value customers place at avoiding long duration outages. Now, the dollar per kilowatt hour we got for that, spoiler alert, was a lot lower than what we were expecting it to be. And we think that might have something to do with the quantification method. So how you calculate a VCR? First of all, I should say the value of customer reliability measures how much customers are willing to pay to have a reliable service. I think we use it in our business cases to capture the trade-off between an affordable service and a consistent service. At the moment, the AAR's VCR methodology calculates outages up to 12 hours. It doesn't look at those long duration outages. So how a VCR is calculated, I think I was talking to my colleagues about this the other day, and I said it's either something you know nothing about or you wish you knew nothing about. But there's 3 key steps involved in the process. Firstly, you do some contingent valuation and choice modeling to assess customers' willingness to pay to avoid a certain outage scenario. Then you divide that by the amount of unserved energy that they would have consumed during the outage scenario had it not occurred. You multiply it by the probability of that outage occurring, and then at the end, you come out with VCR. So the AAR currently calculates these values for all of the NEM, and they break it down by climate zone and remoteness. But we thought we would like to have a specific value for our network. What we found was that our customer value for avoiding the outage scenario was a little bit higher than the results published by the AR. However, the unserved energy and the probability of that outage occurring were where the significant differences lay. So if you'll bear with me, we'll move on to the next slide. So you'll see there what our residential value overall for avoiding an outage between 1 hour and 12 hours was $52.40 for residential customers, while the VCR currently values it at $25. Now, as I mentioned previously, that is being driven by a higher willingness to pay, coupled with a lower kilowatt hour consumption values than the AR currently assumes. We got those kilowatt hour values from our internal data, which was in quite a good shape from our segmentation study that we did earlier in the year. And we're able to work out what our customers would have consumed during the outage. We also have different outage probabilities. So I think the outage probabilities currently used in the VCR model are based on RIN data that all the networks provided in 2018. The outage probabilities that we used in this study was from our RIN data from the previous 5 years. So that changed the distribution slightly. Then you'll see on business, our value is actually a little bit lower than what is currently valued in the VCR, the AR's VCR. That's probably due to our sample composition. So when we were doing this study, we only looked at businesses that were on our small business tariffs, I believe, or maybe small and medium businesses. We didn't account for large customers. And I think that's what's pulling up the AR's VCR values there. When the AR is calculating the VCR, they engage large business customers through direct cost surveys. And we've also begun some engagement with our large business customers to see how we can incorporate their values of reliability into our outputs. Now, you'll see here the resilience values we got. So to do these resilience calculations, we used a methodology and a choice model very similar to what the AR used for the VCR. We just escalated the bill impact a little bit to account for the fact that it was a longer time and obviously changed the time duration of the outages. The values that we got are quite low, and I imagine that's being driven by the large quantity of unserved energy that occurs during a long duration outage. So you'll see there, that's an example. I think that was our urban feeder customers' willingness to avoid a long duration outage on a summer weekday, I believe. And you'll see that their willingness to pay is actually very, 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 well, quite high. But when you divide it by the high quantity of unserved energy that they would have consumed during the outage, it brings us down to a very low dollar per kilowatt hour value. This doesn't really reflect the preferences that customers express to us elsewhere in the study and through our qualitative research. So we think there might perhaps be a better method to calculate the value customers place on avoiding these long duration outages. Now, apologies, I feel like that was an awful lot of information very quickly, but there'll be time for questions at the end. Obviously, we know as well our customers value other aspects of their electricity service other than just reliability and resilience. And we wanted to make sure that we were capturing these values and benefits in this study as well. So to do that, there was a second part of the study we called quantifying the broader benefits. So the 5 benefit streams that Jade mentioned earlier, we also asked customers the value they placed on these services. And to do that, we used 3 key metrics. So first of all, their willingness to accept a degradation in service. So how much would your electricity bill have to reduce by for if you were to experience one more 24-hour outage a year or one more 1-hour outage a year? This value, this metric measures value slightly differently to willingness to pay, in that, first of all, it's not constrained by customers' income, so they're not limited. Secondly, it may have a bit of an endowment effect, in that people don't or research has shown that people don't particularly enjoy giving up things they already have, and they place a higher value on things that they've come to expect and gotten used to. We've also measured their willingness to pay for individual services. So how much, if you were to experience one less 1-hour outage per year, how much would you be comfortable with your electricity bill increasing by? Again, key differences here, it is capped by their income and their ability to pay for an increase in service level. Finally, we also measured a rebased willingness to pay. So this was a question we had at the end of the survey, where we asked respondents, hey, how much would your electricity bill, if you were to get the total bundle of services we described earlier in the study, how much would you be comfortable with your electricity bill increasing by? That was to make sure that we were capturing overall appetite for investment. We did take measures to ensure that customers were being reminded of the bill impacts of their responses throughout the study. You know, we had a little counter on the side to say, okay, you've said this and this and this, your electricity bill is increasing by this much. But we wanted to make sure as well that we got a really clear picture on overall appetite for investment. And by calculating this rebased willingness to pay value, we were also able to look at where priorities lie between investment streams. So here, first of all, we have a high-level overview of residential customers' values on this service stream. You'll see there, perhaps not the most surprisingly, their willingness to accept value was significantly higher than their willingness to pay value. This was being driven by a high value being placed on resilience and avoiding very long duration outages. Solar exports was next for willingness to accept, followed by EV charging, and then reliability on top. Willingness to pay and the rebase willingness to pay, same order of preference, except you'll see in there improving service levels for worse served customers comes second, which shows a clear openness to cost sharing to improve reliability for those with a poor level of service. Perhaps most interestingly, I thought anyway, was the clustering around socioeconomic status and ability to pay, and just how close that was to the network average. You'll see there, people who can't make basic expenses are willing to pay about $20 less per annum than the network average. And then those who live comfortably are, about a little bit less than $10 above, which I thought was quite interesting. When we move on then to businesses' investment priorities, interestingly here, the willingness to pay values and the willingness to accept values don't come in the same order. Businesses, for their willingness to accept, are putting EV charging above solar exports. Again, quite interesting. Like residential customers, resilience most important. Willingness to accept reliability comes next. Whereas it's the least important from a willingness to pay perspective. If I was interpreting these values, I would say that probably comes down to the increased cost of a business experiencing a 1 hour outage that they weren't expecting, you know, staff that they have to pay for, maybe stock that they have to get rid of. But yes, much higher value for willingness to accept there than willingness to pay. EV charging comes next for willingness to accept, possibly coming down to, you know, if a business has or intends to have a large fleet of EV vehicles, they want to be able to charge it when they want. They don't want the network getting involved there. But I think Rob and Charlotte are going to chat to you now about each of these individual metrics in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Chloe. And to start with flexible EV charging, unsurprisingly to us, both households and business customers attach a positive value to have flexibility in the speed and timing of their EV charging. We tested the scenario that the charger would be managed and you might not be able to charge at peak times versus having flexibility. The value is higher for businesses as maybe they have less flexibility given like business hours and EV fleets that they may have in the future. We always like to look at several pieces of research together and see if they corroborate with each other. And we ran some customer workshops late last year, and the results for that are shown in the bottom. And the positive value on flexibility was really also verified through those qualitative customer workshops where we did capture some data. So at the bottom, it's a heat map, and there's a high number of customers who prefer fast and flexible charging, even at a cost, versus managed charging. Although for residential customers at those workshops, there were some that were happy with managed charging, but less than in the flexible charging. So interestingly, on the EV charging values, Lucy or Chloe, if you shift on to the next slide, all customers on average put a benefit on or were willing to pay for flexible charging, even if they don't intend to purchase an EV before 2031 or never intend to purchase an EV. So the numbers here show the willingness to pay for those who have or intend to purchase an EV versus those who don't. All of them are positive, but those who have or intend to purchase an EV put a higher than the average value on flexible charging. Another interesting call out, which is the case for resi customers but not business, is that those people who do have an EV today actually put a relatively lower value on flexible charging versus those who intend to purchase an EV. So maybe the expectation is different to the reality when it comes to owning an EV. Although the big caveat I would put on this is obviously sample size is very low, particularly for those who have an EV today. We move to the next slide. So the next one I'll talk to quickly is solar exports, and we're finding that across the board in all the research that we do, there's a very strong sentiment that customers are very reluctant for networks to spill solar as they see it as sort of wasting electricity. And both households and businesses attach very positive value to investing more to enable solar exports, and the value they attached to those was higher than the value they attached on flexible EV charging. And you can see in the bottom, these are the results from our customer workshops with 120 customers. There was a very, very strong sentiment here around paying more to allow more solar to get to the grid. Now I'm passing to Rob to take us through the reliability results.
Thanks, Charlotte. Hi, everyone. So yeah, the reliability, improving reliability for worst served customers. Unsurprisingly, yeah, a positive value here that came up through the research. It's just in terms of context, I guess, in why it's really important for us to have included this value in the study and getting hard data. we obviously recognise that there is a lot of variation across our customer base in the levels of reliability, in particularly in urban and rural areas that our customers experience. So, which is, predominantly driven by sort of historic network design factors, and also geographic factors like terrain and vegetation and remoteness. So it's very important to get data on willingness to pay for upgrades that might deliver more equitable service levels for our customers that experience poor reliability. As Chloe said earlier, we didn't test a willingness to accept a lower level of reliability for these customers, in terms of, we didn't think it was appropriate to contemplate the scenario of reducing investment and delivering lower levels of reliability for these customers and reduced bills for all other customers, given that that's not something that it's not a proposal that we're exploring. With that in mind, this was the second largest value out of just after resilience in terms of the relative proportion that it makes up for overall willingness to pay. And we've also had a look at, I guess, the research, the sentiments that are coming through in our BAU research around what are our customers, what are they thinking in terms of reliability for urban and regional customers, and should there be more equity there? And some of the research that we did last year showed that more than 8 out of 10 customers think that electricity in regional areas should be as reliable as it is in urban areas. That survey didn't put the cost of achieving that to the survey respondents, but now that we have this data, we can do an economic assessment, a cost-benefit analysis of the sorts of investment that would be needed to achieve greater reliability levels against the willingness to pay from our broader customer base to support that and achieve that. So it's really helpful data for us to have when we're looking at those sorts of trade-offs. Next slide, please, Chloe. Thank you. Interestingly, this data does give us, quite granular breakdowns of the survey respondents' preferences and willingness to pay across different parts of our network. And interestingly, for this particular one, the urban customers on our network had a higher willingness to pay for reliability improvements for worse served customers, despite those urban customers generally having better reliability than average. So that was a really interesting finding. The reasons that might be driving that could be a positive correlation between the urban customers and income and their capacity to pay more. Some customers out of the city in regional areas may be more resigned to having poor reliability, so aren't necessarily sort of willing to pay more to improve that. And also regional customers may be less willing to pay for potential improvements for others if they feel their own reliability needs improving. So there's a few things that might be driving that interesting result, and we'll keep kind of digging into the data to understand that further. Next slide, please. Reliability. So these willingness to pay and willingness to accept values give us sort of additional data in addition to the VCR values that Chloe talked to earlier, that we can use to assess willingness to pay to maintain or improve reliability on our network. Unsurprisingly, there's a positive value attached to these across the resi and business customers that responded. Interestingly, this was one of the lowest out of the 5 values that we looked at. But on the choice modelling and contingent valuation side of the study, the residential VCRs that came through that are about double the AER's VCRs from the 2019 review, which is an interesting insight. The customer workshop findings are shown at the bottom, and you can see that there's a strong preference across resi and business customers to either maintain or improve reliability. So there's some consistency between this study and the other findings that we're getting through our other research and engagement projects. Our study didn't include exactly the same types of business customers as the AER's study. So our study included small businesses, and the AER's VCR review looks at sort of agricultural, commercial, and industrial customers. So that's why it says not calculated for the AER's VCR. But we do note that the business value that came through in our VCR study, it is a little bit lower than the commercial and industrial customers, which range from $44 to $74 per kilowatt hour. And one of the things that might be driving the lower business VCR value that we've seen might potentially be increases in investment that business customers are making in backup generation to become more self-sufficient and stay on during outages. So that will be driving potentially a lower willingness to pay for reliability from the grid. Next slide. Final one from me is resilience. So as was mentioned earlier, this came up as the highest value out of the 5 that we looked at. Interestingly, this research was done before the February 2024 storms that obviously had a significant impact on our customers. So even before that event, this is obviously a very top of mind issue for our customers in terms of paying to avoid these prolonged outages. As Chloe talked to earlier, we think that the values on the contingent valuation values that are shown here, as well as some other research that we've done recently, is potentially more appropriate to getting a value for willingness to pay for prolonged outages, just because of some of the mechanics of the way the VCR is calculated for very prolonged outages. The survey that we did do, there was a survey that we did do called the Resilience Research on the slide, and that was a study that we did of about a survey we did of about 500 customers late last year that experienced prolonged outages, and that involved gathering data on the actual costs that they incurred during those prolonged outages. So things like spoiled and wasted food, or lost income, accommodation and travel costs, generator costs, things like that. So we got some very kind of hard data on the actual costs incurred, and those have been converted into a sort of VCR equivalent value, which is shown on the slide, of a $45 for resi customers and $63 for business customers. As you can see in that footnote there, this is the conservative estimate of a VCR, as these are actual costs incurred, and they don't account for broader economic and social costs of prolonged outages, including emotional distress and lost productivity and broader kind of economic impacts. That's probably it from me. We'll move on to, it for me for this slide. We'll move on to the next steps. Thanks, Chloe. So in terms of where we go from here with this data, there's a fair bit of, as you can see, there's on the top of the slide, we've got quite a number of sort of data points and metrics coming out of this study that we're now turning our minds to how do we apply that to our investment cases for our EDPR proposal, making sure that our investments are, customer centric and reflect kind of robust data on what our customers are willing to pay for particular service level outcomes. So we've got a fair bit of work ahead of us to figure out how to apply those values. There's various kind of permutations in which the different values can be applied to our economic models and our cost benefit analysis. So we'll be engaging very closely with our customer and stakeholder panels on how we should do that to ensure that the application is kind of robust and the values are being used in an appropriate way for our investment cases. As an example, they can be put sort of deterministically into economic models, but they could also be used as sort of a bit of a sense check or a validation on the costs that, bill impacts of proposals and how do they compare with willingness to pay through this survey. So there's a few different ways in which we can potentially use them, but as I said, there's a fair bit to play out there, and we'll be engaging closely with our customers and stakeholders on that. I'll hand over to you now, Charlotte.
Thanks, Rob. So just to add to the next steps, as well as continuing to engage with our reset panel, we're also going to continue to share findings publicly with some key stakeholders and other interested parties. And we're also doing a lot of engagement on these within AusNet to promote some customer focused and more holistic decision making across the board when it comes to investment planning. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm going to hand to Lucy to take us through some of the Slido questions.
Thanks, Charlotte. And we've got a few questions coming through. I'll take the first one quickly. Someone has asked whether we'll share a copy of the presentation. The answer is yes. We'll share a copy of the presentation after the session, along with written responses to any questions we don't get to today. So please don't hold back on any questions you've got. We'll try and get to as many as we can in the 20 minutes we've got left. But anything we can't answer, we will try and answer in writing afterwards. So Charlotte, the next question we've had is, how did we ensure survey participants were sufficiently educated or informed in order to provide meaningful input to the survey and answer the questions accurately?
Thanks, Lucy. So yeah, we're aware that these surveys can have limitations in terms of customer understanding. So we did take some mitigating actions to try and manage this risk. So we did a few things. The material that we shared was heavily informed by the qualitative stage. So we did a lot of testing of the materials before we went live with the questionnaire, and that involved cognitive interviews where 12 randomly selected customers sat with an expert from our service provider and literally worked through the survey, talked through how they were interpreting the materials, and the expert picked up on verbal and non-verbal feedback and observations, which helped them finalize the actual questionnaire that went out. We also worked very closely with our customer panel on this study, including on the materials that were shared. So they really challenged us on plain English, as well as our service provider as well. So that's the approach we took.
Thanks, Charlotte. I might go to you first with the next one as well. Someone's asked, what is the status of AusNet's VCR values under the NER, National Electricity Rules? Won't the AER just impose its own values?
So my understanding of the rules is that there is flexibility for different VCR values to be applied. Obviously, the quality of the evidence base is going to be a key consideration into that. So I think our study provides us with some really robust data. I mean, another key consideration is what it looks like if we use them, and our engagement with our customers on whether it's actually delivering the right sort of outcomes once fed through our business cases. It also, though, really provides us with some sort of early insights on where the AER's study may end up for us, given we have replicated the methodology but tailored it to our customer characteristics.
Thanks, Charlotte. The next most popular one we've got, and Jade, I might throw to you on this because I know we have this data. Do you know what proportion of your respondents have backup generation?
Excuse me. Yes, we ask about what they have for the backup solutions for the mitigate the outage, the impact. And one of those are the generator. For the residential, 24% indicated they have the generator at their household. But just that there are some differences between urban and rural areas. The urban is 10%, rural is about 22%, more than doubled. And business customers, 35% indicated that they have a electricity generator. It's also same tendency in urban and rural. So urban area, the 26%, and rural area indicated the 42% has a generator at their business.
Thanks, Jade. Now, Chloe, I'll go to you for the next one. Someone has asked, EV charging flexibility, is that controlled versus uncontrolled charging, or was flexibility defined as managed charging with the ability to override? Can anyone else hear Chloe? That's okay. Charlotte, I might go to you in the interim. We've had a question on whether our customer panel raised any concerns about the complexity of the method.
Yes, plenty. We had very extensive and detailed discussions with our customer panel on this. I would say though that the complexity of the method is really the back end of the research. It's really what customers see is very simple, and what allows them to actually engage in the survey. The method itself and the complexity of the method is something that customers don't see. But there were definitely, lots of detailed discussions about this. But importantly, that's one of the reasons why we don't solely rely on this. We're also looking across lots of other different research methodologies when we're forming conclusions as to what customers value.
Thanks, Charlotte. And I think that ties in well with another question we've had asked on whether the customer panel had views on surveys versus other engagement methods like deliberative forums.
Yes, absolutely. And I can see some of our customer panel members on the line, so hopefully I'm representing their views well. But yeah, there was absolutely discussion about the value of deliberative forums in particular, and the limitations of surveys. But I mean, AusNet's view is that we need both. And at the end of the day, we do have to put values through a business case. So if we have a set of values that are as robust that we can make them, and then also triangulated by deliberative forums and customer discussions that gives us confidence in those values as well, then that's sort of the best we can do. And I would say too that particularly on the VCR, what we have is replicated the methodology that's currently used NEM-wide by businesses to account for this trade-off. So we don't really feel like we've pushed any boundaries when it comes to that methodology in particular.
Thanks, Charlotte. Chloe, I'll try you again with the question: EV charging flexibility, is it controlled versus uncontrolled, or did we define flexibility as managed charging with the ability to override?
Yes, of course. So the flexible charging, the willingness to pay metric was defined as no network involvement in your charging at all. You can charge whenever you like. And then the willingness to accept value was defined as network managed charging, with particular time periods. So peak evening time, you may not be able to charge your EV at all. We didn't test the ability to override because we wanted to measure the extreme ends of the spectrum. Yeah.
Thanks, Chloe. And I might throw to you on the next one. Do you account for any loss of self-consumption from DER, CER as part of unserved energy? If so, was there much differential?
Yes, we do indeed. So again, we followed the AR's methodology quite closely here. When they were working out their unserved energy amounts, they calculated what they called a solar factor. So this was the difference between average hourly consumption of households without solar panels and households with solar panels. Now, quite luckily from our customer segmentation study earlier in the year, we had a very nice already made up breakdown of our customer base with solar panels and without solar panels. We then were able to look at the difference in consumption between the two. I think the AR solar factor came out at about 19%. So they escalated the energy consumed from the grid by people with solar panels by 19%. Ours came to about 22, so a little bit higher than where it was in 2019.
Thanks, Chloe. Now, Rob, I might throw to you on the next one. We've had a question from Sam who's asked for willingness to pay for worse served customers. What level of benefit corresponded to the level of investment, i.e., have targets been set for reliability metrics, etc.?
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, so the specific, I guess, question and service level outcome put to the customers in this part of the survey was about what would customers be willing to pay for around our 20,000 or so worst served customers on our network to improve their reliability level which is about 5 to 6 times worse than the average, to improve their reliability level back towards an average network level of reliability, which is sort of around 2 to 3 hours of outage per year per customer on average on our network. So we haven't set specific reliability improvement targets for worse served customers. It's going to be a very case by case basis depending on the project, the location, the project, the network characteristics, what level of reliability improvement can be achieved. So at this stage in the process, we thought it was appropriate to sort of target and getting to an average level.
Thanks, Rob. Chloe, I'll throw back to you for the next one. We've had a question: over what time period is probability of outage occurring, and does that vary widely across the network?
Yes, okay, so probability of outage occurring was calculated based on customer minutes. So that is our RIN data for all unplanned outages lasting between 3 hours and 3 minutes and 12 hours that fell into one of the 32 outage scenarios in the choice modeling. So for an outage to be considered, it would have to occur in summer or winter, not spring or autumn. Yeah, I think that was the main differential. And then we looked at the amount of customers that were off supply for how many minutes and multiplied the two by each other, and then assigned every minute of an outage into one of the outage scenarios. We broke that up by our 3 feeder classes. So we had one value for urban feeders, one value for short feeders, and one short rural and one for long rural. Unsurprisingly, the outage probabilities were quite different for long rural feeders compared to the other two. And I should say as well, all that data was calculated based on our last 5 published RINs. So I think that was 2018 to 2023.
Thanks, Chloe. Rob, I might throw to you next. This one's been getting quite a few votes up. Given your relatively low dollars per kilowatt hours for resilience, do you think there's a better method to estimate the VCR for long outages?
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Yeah, sure. Short answer is yes. The very low dollar per kilowatt hours are kind of inconsistent with other data that we're collecting on the impact these outages have on customers and the value that they might place on avoiding them. So there's probably a couple of ways of addressing this. There's looking closely at the specific kind of inputs and the structure of the way the VCR is calculated, in particular, dividing by the very large volume of unserved energy that's used to calculate that resilience VCR. That's driving this low value. And then there's also some other kind of specific inputs and assumptions that go into the choice model and contingent valuation that could be tweaked as well to make the kind of existing method more fit for purpose for those resilience VCRs. And then there's also exploring other ways of coming up with a resilience VCR, such as direct cost surveys, which is similar to what we did in that November resilience research last year. But we think that that's a method that the AER uses for very large customers in its current methodology, and it's also a method that has been used at previous VCR reviews prior to the AER taking over the role of doing the VCR review. So yeah, we definitely think there's quite a lot of scope to kind of explore and identify the most robust method to coming up with a value of resilience.
Thanks, Rob. Chloe, I'll throw back to you for the next one. We've had a question on whether willingness to ask questions were presented in a similar way to willingness to pay. A willingness to accept, sorry.
Yes, of course. So how it was presented in the survey was customers for each of the value streams got a brief explanation of what the current level of service was. Then they were asked, how much would you be willing to pay for the improvement, and how much would you expect your electricity bill to decrease by for the degradation? And that order was assigned randomly. So some customers were asked willingness to pay first, willingness to accept last, or willingness to accept first for different values. So yes, I think they were treated the same.
Thanks, Chloe. Rob, I'll ask this next one to you. If you seek to use these VCR willingness to pay values, do you see yourself doing it at a network-wide average level or going more granular, e.g. at a feeder level?
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, it's potentially both. There's a fair bit to play out in terms of, as I talked about earlier, engaging with our stakeholders on kind of what's the most robust way of applying these, which could be in either of those two different approaches, and also some further internal work that we need to do and that will feed into the engagement is what are the impacts of applying the values to economically justified spend, whether it's network wide or for specific projects or specific locations. There's potential for these values to have, a very, very material impact on our investment proposals. So we'll need to obviously look through the impacts of that on our proposal as a whole, taking account of various factors. But really the key thing is that's sort of the exact way we're going to apply them is going to be informed heavily by the further engagement that we do with our customers and stakeholders.
Thanks, Rob. Charlotte, I'll go to you on the next one. How were the 5 customer values chosen?
Thanks, Lucy. Good question. So we did start with a very long wish list of things we wanted to test, and then really refined based on what could be better tested through other means. So through like qualitative, more qualitative forums like workshops, things that we also already capture a lot of data on. We do a lot of customer research as BAU, where we're testing perspectives at least every 6 months, as well as testing our customer satisfaction. So for example, we had customer experience on the long list, but that is really covered off through our broader research program. I think where we've ended up, we've got some really core investment drivers for our customers that are coming through strongly in our reset engagement, being, reliability and resilience, which are really core functions of services, and then a couple of new streams being EVs and solar as well. So probably the ones that were most important to have a quantitative value on as we go into the next reset period as well.
Thanks, Charlotte. No, I might stay with you for the next one. Have we considered how to approach value stacking in cost-benefit analysis for projects with multiple benefit streams that could be applied from these outputs?
Good question. The answer is no. We haven't really got to that detail of the application yet. My immediate thought when it comes to that, though, is that by testing the rebasing, so looking at willingness to pay for all streams at once, that really helps, I think, inform whether the value stacking might be an accurate approach of capturing multiple benefits. So that's definitely something that we'll be considering further in detail with our reset panels.
Thanks, Charlotte. And Rob, one more question with a brief answer from you, and then I'll hand to Charlotte to close. Do you think these values can or should inform the appropriate level of statutory compensation payments, e.g. guaranteed service levels and prolonged planned outage payments, GSLs and PPOPs?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, we obviously don't set those payments, and so perhaps this is a matter for the ESC and the government to consider further when looking at those payments. I don't know if you have a comment on this, Charlotte, but yeah.
Oh, I'll say what it does do actually is it does show an appetite for paying to improve the reliability of the worst served customers. So there's a cross-subsidy element for those customers who receive a worse service, which probably goes to the policy intent of GSLs and PPOP. Okay, so we're at the end of our time. Thanks everyone for attending today. We will be circulating the slide pack shortly, and please reach out if you have any further questions. Thanks everyone.